Most of us are familiar with the story of Emmett Till, but 11 years before Emmett Till was murdered, there was another young black boy who was falsely accused, and he was also murdered in the South. And his story is heartbreaking. Let's get into it. In March of 1944, George Stinney was a typical 14-year-old boy living in South Carolina during a time of Jim Crow. George's life would take a tragic turn when he and his sister were approached by 11-year-old Betty Beneker and 7-year-old Mary Timms, two little white girls who were out searching for flowers. Although George's encounter with Betty and Murray was brief, it would later come back to haunt him in the worst way. Betty and Murray never made it home that day, and their disappearance led to a massive search. Sadly, the next day, the bodies of both little girls were discovered. They had been murdered. Now, there was a rumor that on the day the girls disappeared, they had made a stop at the home of a prominent white family. However, this rumor was never confirmed, as the police were not interested in arresting anyone that was white for this crime. Now, a witness came forward and stated that on the day that both girls disappeared, they had seen both of these girls talking to George Stinney. Based off of this, law enforcement arrested George. 14-year-old George Stinney was interrogated for hours without his parents, an attorney, or any witnesses present. Now, police later claimed that George Stinney confessed to murdering both girls. Law enforcement kept George locked away in a secret location due to rumors of a lynching, and George's family was forced to flee their home. The trial lasted for 2 hours, and 14-year-old George Stinney was given a court-appointed attorney who did nothing to defend his client. It took 10 minutes for an all-white jury to convict George Stinney of the murders of both girls. Now, this verdict upset a lot of people, and there were protests and petitions sent to the governor. And on April 24, 1944, he was sentenced to death by electrocution. On June 16, 1944, 14-year-old George Stinney was executed by the state of South Carolina. In 2014, George Stinney's murder conviction was overturned by the state of South Carolina. But unfortunately, the damage had already been done. It took the state of South Carolina 70 years to admit that they had murdered an innocent young boy. Allow that to sink in. May we never forget the stories of George Stinney and Emmett Till.